Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Durst. I've been hiring, firing, and mentoring executives, frontline employees, interns, and job seekers in companies around the world through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. I work with people in Hong Kong, India, Australia, and across the United States. What sets them apart? A lot, but there's more they have in common. And one of those commonalities is transition is a part of life. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions that are big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet, the people who can make the difference that matters to you right now. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big change. The insight track you're going to access during our future episodes is better than a crystal ball. It's the exact information you need to take that next step. Whether you're a new grad applying for your first professional job, someone looking to transition your work experience into a promotion, launching your own company, or maybe even starting to plan your retirement, you're in transition, and this series is for you. We all know transition can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have VIP access to the future you want. Are you tired of the uncertainty of being passed up? We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to the front of the line. So, if change is on your horizon, or maybe just the thought of change, you won't want to miss this discussion. It could be the exact edge you need to turn transition into an amazing opportunity. Sarah Hodges, thank you so much for being with us today on our episode of People in Transition. I'm really looking forward to this.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me to be on.
Sarah, when you were younger, what did you want to be when you, and I'm doing air quotes here, grew up?
It's actually so funny you asked me that. Whenever somebody asks me that, I remember sitting down with my Barbies, and like one was a teacher, and one was a singer, and one was a doctor. And I also really wanted to be an orthodontist because my grandfather was an orthodontist and I idolized him. And I remember taking my Barbies to my mom, and I was like on the verge of tears, being like, "Mom, I can't decide. I want to be everything." And I decided that I was going to be everything. And, come to think of it, except for the orthodontist part, although I did work in his office for a while, I have had all of those professional careers in some capacity.
That's great. Barbies are great coaching people because they sit and don't judge at all, right? Sarah, what were the transition moments that occurred to you to get you from that picture of yourself as a young child to where you're at today?
To be honest, they were freaking horrible traumas in my life. Let's just call a spade a spade. I was the victim of sexual misconduct by a teacher. That was the first one shortly after high school. I don't talk about that too often, but it happens, and I think it's important to be transparent. About 10 years later, my first husband came out as gay, and that was another transition. After that, I was finally getting going again. My little brother died of cancer. Shortly after that, I had a stillborn baby. And so with all of these traumas, I kind of use them as a catalyst to redefine myself and my career. And I'm the kind of person who copes by leaning in and learning more and trying to understand my experiences on a deeper level. So after the initial trauma with my teacher, I changed my focus to psychology and then back to music. And then I decided to go into singing as opposed to being a teacher myself. I was an opera singer in New York City. And then after my husband came out, I stopped being an opera singer and I became a personal trainer. And then I just got into coaching. After my brother died, I became a financial advisor. and then I decided that wasn't for me. And I went into business coaching. And it was actually when my baby was stillborn. And instead of completely shifting my career, I dug deeper into business coaching and to coaching executives. That's when I knew that I really found what brought me joy, because I wanted to do more of it as opposed to doing something differently. So my life has been one giant curlicue of trauma and I like to say resiliency. So it's been one giant transition.
Wow, Sarah, that's powerful. Let's say a friend calls you up and tells you that they've lost their job because their company is going out of business because of the COVID crisis. What will you coach that friend? What's the two or three things that they should do right away?
Well, the first thing that I would coach them to do is to give themselves some space to grieve. I think so often we want to jump in and get to the next best thing, and that's great, but without giving yourself some space to grieve the loss of that job or the loss of your company and the loss of hope and the loss of stability, there's so much loss there to process, right? And people don't want to feel it. And it's so important to feel it because it will come out in other things later, whether it is you act like a weirdo in your interviews because you're so desperate to find your next job, or you start having difficulty with anxiety and stress and you're not sleeping at night. So the first thing is to give yourself some time and remind yourself that although you want to get to another job right away, there isn't necessarily a pressing rush. Like, you can give yourself a little bit of space. And the second thing is, I would say, to give yourself, after you give yourself space to grieve, also give yourself some compassion. Remind yourself that, this is not necessarily your fault, right? That this is not the end of the world for you. And to show yourself a little bit of kindness. I think we can beat ourselves up a lot and kind of fall into a victim mentality. And the third thing, and I think something that really came from all of my transitions that I'm only starting to really fundamentally accept even now, is that transition is a normal state, right? Seasons change. Each day is different. We move, things happen. People are born, people die. Our bodies are adapting every day to a slightly different environment and different stimulus. So transition is a normal state. Expect it to happen. And in a sense, once you accept that transition is a normal state, then you can start to use it as a catalyst for growth, which is really, really cool. And so I imagine that, when you ask somebody this question, you expect them to say, oh, jump out, give your resume to somebody right away, call 20 friends. But I think that's obvious stuff, right? To get back on the horse. But it's also really important to do the internal work so that you're leveling up and you're becoming more resilient from your core, as opposed to just finding another job.
Sir, let's build on that statement of give yourself some compassion, that it's not your fault.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, what do you think that this statement means to you? Not being employed, being in transition, being in between jobs is not a place of shame. You are more than a job.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I love that quote. Who said that quote?
I did.
Yeah, you're a genius. Everybody hire Bob when you're in a place of transition. Yeah, it's exactly. It's not a place of shame. And what happens, so in my coaching firm, we take a neurophysiological approach to everything, right? We talk about how your emotions are affecting your brain and how that is affecting your physiology with stress hormones and such. And shame is really a trigger of chronic stress. And when you are under chronic stress, it's far more difficult to get yourself motivated, to connect deeply with others, to think through problems. You don't really have full use of your human brain, your frontal lobe. So when you don't have full use of your prefrontal cortex because you're under chronic stress, it's just going to make every part of finding a new job really, really difficult. So one thing you can do as a first step is give yourself compassion to neutralize that feeling of shame you have about being out of the job. That will help you neutralize your chronic stress, put your prefrontal cortex back online, and will actually help you find a job faster.
How do you think you should use LinkedIn or other social media tools when you're in transition?
Yeah, I think it's a great way to connect with people as much as you can. I do recommend that you do your best to make authentic connections. I've coached several people through transition when they're making those LinkedIn connections, or they're even showing up for the interview that ensues. They are trying to they become a chameleon. They're just trying to answer the question right. It will somehow get them that job. And really, at the end of the day, whether it's selling a product or selling yourself for a position, people hire based on connection, based on emotion. And so if you can really connect with that person and show up as an authentic human being, and allow that person to show up as an authentic human being and laugh and just be real, that's going to help a lot. And that starts with the first message.
Sarah, data shows that men are often offered jobs based on their charisma and potential, while women have to prove that they have already done the job. This makes it obviously more difficult for women to switch industries, get promoted, gain new skills, or sometimes even just get an interview. How do you deal with that potential reality in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think that can also be said for minorities, and perhaps that didn't show up in your data, but any minorities, people who and also individuals who are overweight, any sort of outlier is going to have to prove more than your average white male, and that is what the data shows. Not just me trying to make a sweeping statement. But I think the point is, when you are at a disadvantage for whatever reason, how do you deal with that? And I think the answer is you accept it. You accept that this is the situation at hand. This is the cards that you have been dealt, and this is the dominant culture in which we live. And accepting it does not mean not trying for the job. Accepting it doesn't mean speaking up if you feel like there is discrimination. Accepting it does not mean not advocating for yourself. Accepting it just means that you don't lose sleep over it at night. You say, okay, this is how it is. Now what? You accept it as a way to get yourself motivated to move forward and make a change. And accepting it is going to help you deal with those negative thoughts and feelings that you have about it, so that you're not going in to a meeting and you're thinking in the back of your mind, oh, I'm not going to get this job because I have to prove it to them because I'm not a white male. Instead, you're going in thinking, you know what? I might not get this job because I'm not a white male. So let me just put everything out there and see what happens. So you're going in with a sense of confidence through acceptance.
How do you deal with that killer recruiting question? Tell me what your weaknesses are.
I think that you deal with it with humor, because every single human being on the planet has weaknesses. I think that if you don't have any weaknesses, if you don't think you have any weaknesses, then your weakness might be a lack of self-awareness, right? So to just be like, oh man, I characteristically show up for every client 2 minutes late, and I hate that I do that. I feel like I'm sliding into home base and I get tagged out right before I slide in every single time. I talk really fast. I have all sorts of weaknesses that I'm working on every day and I'm super aware of, and also ones that I'm not super aware of that I'm sure I will become aware of at some point. But to just answer it with a sense of humor and maybe even ask them, what are some of your weaknesses, so that I can know how to help you and show you compassion.
Sarah, many of today's careers, and I maintain life in general, doesn't have that linear upward ladder trajectory. It's a much curlier progression.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thoughts on that? And kind of a follow-up question to that is that how do you know that you're growing if you don't have those upward milestone markers in that traditional ladder?
Ooh, those are two very good questions. So let's talk about the first one first. I'm doing a degree program at Harvard. It's been really fun. And last semester I was taking a course in sustainability and leadership for the 21st century by Leith Sharp. And one of the components that we studied the most in that class was what she called the squiggle. And she said that every story, we have an official story. This is how I got from A to B. And we leave out a lot of the little details, the little ups and downs. And because of that, we are stuck in hierarchical networks, and the stories continue to reinforce those hierarchical networks. And so it leaves out the frustrations that we have, the conversations that we had to have that maybe went across silos, the internal struggles, the psychological safety we had to create. And so I think it's really important to recognize that in terms of a larger pattern, like my giant squiggles in life, that where my career went in a million different directions, that even on a project basis at work, there are squiggles, and to embrace those, and know that they're going to happen, and know that you're going to have ups and downs. And really at the end of the day, embracing that transition, that's why it helps you with resilience. It helps you both on the job and in between jobs, so to speak. And then to answer your second question, so one of the things I come across often with my one-on-one clients is that they struggle to measure their progress with internal metrics. So they look for external metrics, kind of like, what's the number on the scale? How much money am I making? What did my boss have to say about me? How was I rated at my last job performance review? External measurements. And so we work a lot on developing an internal measurement. So they can say, on how is my stress level 1 to 10? How much do I look forward to going to work on Monday on a scale of 1 to 10? And if you measure yourself in these areas on a regular basis, that can be really beneficial for you to not only grasp what's happening externally, but how your internal sense of well-being is growing and improving over time.
Sarah, what can you do to remain focused during your transition? Transition management can be boring, can be tiring, can be, as we've said, stressful. And how can you help overcome those issues?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is visualization. Giving yourself space to daydream and get really excited about the possibilities that are out there. So that may mean waking up in the morning and over breakfast, closing your eyes and imagining the job that you're going to be going to. It could mean doing like future journaling and journaling about an imaginary day that you just had at your first day of work, or maybe your 10th year working there, I don't know, but really putting yourself in that future state where you have reached what it is you're looking for and focusing on how it makes you feel. And that will keep you in a forward moving state. So you're moving toward that as opposed to trying to pull yourself out of the drudgery of looking for a new job.
How does your health impact how you go through transition? And what should you do to improve your health to help your transition?
Yeah. So this is a really complicated answer. I was a former health coach, and a lot of, like I said, I have a neurophysiological approach. And so your body absolutely affects your brain. But obviously, it's important to move. It's important to put good nutrients into your body. And that's so that your body can recover from the stress and the shame that you may be experiencing from not having a job position in this time of transition. At the same time, if you are under extreme stress, and I mean extreme stress, like you can't sleep at night, you're sobbing all day, you are really grieving the fact that you lost your job and you don't know what to do next, pull out the Haagen-Dazs. Honestly, pull out the Haagen-Dazs, and you don't want to get stuck there, but use it as a way to help soothe your stress response, to give your body enough glycogen to help it repair. Otherwise, your body is going to be in a constant state of fight or flight. That's not good for it either. The last thing you want to do is eat a salad and put the added stress on your body of having to then break down all of the fiber that's in that salad. So, our dominant culture teaches us that Help food is help food is help food, and you need to always be eating that help food and taking good care of yourself. But in times of extreme stress, you want to really give yourself fuel, and that fuel is typically going to come in the form of glucose.
Someone once told me that any job is better than no job. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I think it depends on your values. When my ex-husband came out as gay, and I was determined to make it in New York City. I worked 6 jobs. I was a nanny. I was gigging. I had an Etsy shop. My friend certified me as a lifeguard, and I worked as a lifeguard at 2 different places. And then I became a personal trainer and a health coach. I just hustled, and it kept me in motion, right? And I think that other people need time to grieve, and they need that space, and they need to really think about what they want to do next. So it really, do some soul searching and figure out what's right for you. And you can also pilot it. You can say, all right, you know what? I'm going to try just getting something and seeing how I feel. Or you may say, I'm going to give myself, a month or 2 weeks or whatever feels right to you to just have some space to figure out what I want to do next. And then at this date, I'm going to find something.
How do you think doing volunteer work will help someone who is looking for another job?
I think volunteer work puts you in motion, right? There's a sense of gratification. So in a sense, it's kindness to others, which will help, which also makes you feel it's almost a kindness to yourself at the same time, right? It's great for networking and getting to know other people who share common values, and just gives you a sense of purpose. And anything that's going to help motivate you and give you a sense of purpose is going to, again, keep you in motion, keep you feeling positive, and keep you looking.
Sarah, in order to accelerate your search, and you've kind of alluded to it just now when you talk about networking, you need to get comfortable with engaging your network, not only people that you don't know, but people that you do know, and reaching out to them and enlisting their support and thoughts. And if I'm a private person, maybe a little bit more introverted, don't want to talk about my situation, I find it harder to do that networking. Again, even the ones that know me. How would you coach me to deal with that issue?
Well, first, I would talk about really what I just mentioned earlier of the self gratification of helping another person. And remember that if you do ask another person for help, it can actually be a gift to them and bring them a sense of joy for helping you out of a sticky situation, because humans feel really good when they help out other humans. And the second part is, if you're feeling that private that you don't want to share it, then it's time to go back to that compassion piece to help neutralize some of that shame. There is no shame in being out of a job. Life is full of transitions. And I know it can be really hard to think about, quote unquote, going backward, right? I hear that sometimes. Or, it's just like, it can be a big hit to the ego, right? And we kind of have our tail between our legs. And, we're all humans. All of us have felt that in some way. Give people an opportunity to show you some compassion and to help you out. And again, pilot it. Start with just one person and see how they respond.
Sarah, what if you have something bad in your past work history, discipline, or maybe even being fired? How do you handle this as you're talking with potential new employers?
Share what you learned from it and how it's changed you, and how you know that it was a really tough situation. And at the same time, you're grateful for the experience because now you are who you are today. So talk about it as though it's something that has helped you grow.
Speaking of transitions, as we have here this morning, transition happens even if you're employed. If you think about the last year, many of us have transitioned from working in our office to working from home, or Zoom meetings, Skype meetings. There have just been constant transitions to kind of a new normal.
Absolutely.
And remote workers, we want them to stay engaged, to stay positive in that new environment. How do you coach those people who are experiencing that, still employed, but still in transition, and keep them engaged and positive?
Yeah, so this has been a really, really common topic. In fact, in my Hodges Leadership Institute, I just created a new course on leading remotely. People are having such difficulty with this. And one thing, if you're leading a team and you're struggling with engagement, I recommend creating connection KPIs, some sort of goals, some sort of bare minimum standard where you are requesting your team to reach out to each other and have conversations, even if it's a 5-minute check-in, and somebody different all the time, so that your team is connecting on a deeper level, because we don't have the quick conversations in the hallway or in the break room or even in the bathroom these days. And so you have to be more intentional about it. And so really, you can have a highly engaged, super connected remote team. In fact, my very own team, we've never met in person. We've always been remote, and we're really, they were just talking about it today, how connected we all feel to each other. But that's because we did it with intention. So you have to be very intentional about making opportunities for points of connection.
Sarah, do you think that transition management, moving between jobs, is somehow different today than it was 5-10 years ago?
I'm sure that there are technicalities that are different, and that they will be different again in another year, 5 years, 10 years. But I think that in terms of what it takes and the internal resources you need to rely on, it's probably relatively the same. I would say, however, that there is far less stigma about being between jobs now than there was 10 years ago, because, and this is probably because of my generation, we tend to stay in jobs less. We don't stay in jobs for the same duration that our parents did.
Sarah, how do you use professional organizations, the CPA Society, the Society of Human Resource Management, Rotary? How do you use those to your advantage during your transition?
I say, again, it's showing up authentically, looking to make connections that are deeper than just what can you do for me. Finding points of connection, things to laugh at with people, stories that you can share with them that are really funny about yourself or your kids, being able to laugh even at some of the mistakes that you've made. And when you show up authentically and you own all of yourself, not just the good parts, and you're not afraid to let the other person see all of yourself, not just the good parts, you give them permission to do the same. And that helps soothe their nervous system. And then you have a really deep connection on an energetic level. And those are the type of people who want to help you out. Those are the type of people who look forward to seeing you, who want to share you with their friends who may be looking to fill a position.
Sarah, the number one job hunting tip that you'd pass on to that friend we talked about earlier who's maybe lost their job, what's that star Sarah Hodges job tip that you'd pass on to them?
I would say look for the culture that fits you. Don't try to fit yourself into a culture.
What do you mean by that?
I had a feeling you were going to ask that. You want to look for a place where you feel at home, where you feel like the company values match your values, where you feel like you will be accepted and understood, and you feel comfortable, you feel psychologically safe. You know that if here's a place where you can grow and you can fail and you can mess up, and you can, when you do something well, people are going to, share their gratitude with you. A place where they're empathetic with each other, right? Or in a place that matches your own personal values, instead of trying to change yourself to fit into another culture.
Sarah, any books or other resources that you would recommend to someone going through their personal transition?
Yeah, one book that helped me a lot was the book Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff. And I use her tools in coaching all the time. And I found that book to have a lot of really great insight into how to apply and use self-compassion and really understand how it's a motivator, as opposed to what we traditionally think is that it will, make you complacent. But it's actually a motivator, and it helps you rebound after difficult situations like the loss of a job. That's the first book that I would get my friend who just calls me and tells me she was fired.
Sarah, if our listeners only remember three things as they go through their own personal transition, what are those three things you want them to remember?
Yeah, I think they're what I mentioned earlier. Number one, give yourself time and space to grieve and be upset about it. There's no rush. Even if it feels like there's a rush, there really isn't that much of a rush. Number two is to show yourself some compassion and some self-kindness. And number three, remember that acceptance is a normal state. Like you said earlier, Bob, it happens within jobs, right? We have the squiggle, that curly Q within projects. And if you accept transition as a normal state and you go into job interviews with that place of acceptance, it's really going to help your resiliency. It's going to help you bounce back and be able to deal with other future disappointments, whether they're in job or another loss of a job, with more grace.
Sarah Hodges, thank you so much for your sharing, for your caring enough for the people who are listening that might be struggling and giving them some thoughts and insights in terms of dealing with their own transition, and for showing your vulnerability in terms of the life transitions that you've experienced and how they have shaped the person that you are today. Sarah, thank you so much for being with us on this episode of People in Transition.
Thank you, Bob. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We're working in unprecedented times as the world responds to the recent COVID-19 crisis. The fact is that even those who are not in transition understand it could be right around the corner, next month, or a year from now. The purpose of these episodes are to give listeners support and the critical tools to adjust with the winds, wherever they come. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully, perhaps gracefully, or without too many battle scars, survived their own obstacle courses, and can share useful information on how to steady your ship or your world in this uncertainty. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on social media. If you have any questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I appreciate your time you're investing in sharing these important conversations with me, my guests, and others who are going through life transition. Transitions between jobs, life stages, new entrepreneurial ventures, or whatever life brings. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode of People in Transition.